Hello everyone here today for joining us. I'm very happy to be with you all again, and please feel free as you're joining in to remember to use your chat feature. We also have a Q&A box open, and please also use the raise hand feature here. So this is always meant for you guys to interactively join in on the conversation via chat questions and answers, or again, raise your hand feature. If you like to have a question, we'll consider that live. It's truly amazing also to see where you all join in from. So please feel free to use that chat feature right now just to let us know where you're joining us from. We've seen our audience grow from across the world, and it's always really a wonderful feeling to see that. I am Petra Rassel. A quick introduction here. I am the head of coaching at LeggUP. We are a professional development platform for career coaching, helping organizations to transform through development of their leaders and employees. And again, welcome to LeggUP's weekly webinar series, Thriving from Home. You are joining us today for part 5 of our 6-part series. It is our mission to support leaders to rise to the challenge created by COVID-19. And our webinar today is titled Learning Agility. We will continue to support you here over the coming weeks, every Thursday, with topics like mindset, stress management, and anxiety reduction, as they all pertain to how we can set ourselves up for success while working from home. It is my true pleasure and distinct honor to introduce our expert on today's topic, learning agility, LeggUP coach, experienced leadership and career coach, Heidi Lumpkin. Heidi helps professionals discover exactly who they want to be as a leader and how to get there with confidence. And without any further ado, I hand it over to you, Heidi. And again, welcome at LeggUP, and thank you for sharing your insight with us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Petra. I'm very excited about this and this topic. And thank you all for joining. As Petra said, my name is Heidi Lumpkin, and I'm a career and leadership coach. I specialize in coaching for careers and coaching with managers. And my experience with coaching started over 10 years ago when I got my certification. I was part of a learning and development organization in conjunction with HR for a global Fortune 500 company. I was a manager, I was also a director, and I have personally managed employees who had the learning agility capability and others who did not. I've been in positions where it's been a requirement of me to succeed. And because I'm a coach, I get to see leadership development in action a lot. But my question for you is, how do you know, as a leader, if the skills that you choose to develop are the right skills? How do you figure out what you need to know how to do before you're faced with having to do it, right? What skills help us professionally in leadership in our careers, but are they the ones that are going to help us meet these changing needs? The VUCA landscape, right? Today's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And goodness knows we're really experiencing that at an accelerated pace, especially in the last few weeks. So before the pandemic, we'd likely be having a different conversation around this topic. Many of us thought we were prepared for the challenges. And then all of a sudden there's this set of tests, right? These parameters of operation and the pace of change and complexity came at us very, very quickly. Add that to VUCA and navigating this already complex world of business. And here we are, faced with challenges that require us to do things that we've never done. Self-awareness helps, right? But it can only take you so far. And really, how do we know as leaders, how are we adequately prepared for what the business, for what our teams and our projects will face? And add that on to what's going to happen in the future and that we don't know. So that's where learning agility comes in. It's not a singular skill, but it's a set of behaviors that a leader can have to thrive in this complex environment. And he or she does that by being able to apply quick skills adapt to the needs of the business, and generate novel solutions to challenges. Korn Ferry calls learning agility the X factor in leadership, and that being learning agile is the most important predictor of executive success, above IQ and above education. Really, at its core, learning agility is knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. So this tells us a little bit about the old paradigm of business, if you will. The paradigm has shifted, and it's not that long ago when we were operating in a different set of values, and they were necessary. You used to need to have certainty. You need to make confident choices with more information. There likely weren't as many choices to choose from, so certainty may have been a little bit different. Frameworks were more limited. There were fewer options. So certainty in which option was necessary. Authority as a leadership skill that used to be very valued, providing that domain expertise. You became the master of your craft for the entirety of your career in some cases. This type of knowledge was necessary. We didn't have the speed or the means of technology to create the speed of change, even if we had wanted to. And then a scarcity mindset. With scarcity, we approach markets and roles and information as limited, ownership of it as competitive. Company loyalty was a business value due to scarcity. And these weren't inherently bad behaviors. They got us here where we are today. And there were good things that came from these values. Certainty brought about predictability. Authority brought about expertise, and scarcity brought about loyalty and maybe a sense of ownership and pride in one's place in the company and the world. But what strikes me about these skills is that they're the exact opposite of the ones you need to have learning agility. So think about some of those you've come across professionally who still operate in this paradigm. Maybe somebody who's been in a role for a long time. Some phrases you'll hear that point to this type of a mindset is, that's the way we've always done it, or a frequent reference to a last job or a last company, maybe resting on laurels. These are the phrases that are the kiss of death to learning agility on a team and in an organization. So now we talk about those mindset shifts. How do we get from that old paradigm and what it looks like? Acquiring learning agility requires us to shed old ways and adopt a new mindset, really. Certainty with a new mindset then becomes discovery, continuously asking questions, being innovative, and generating 10 options from a challenge instead of 2 or 3. Instead of authority and domain expertise, becoming a student of other teams and really pumping up that cross collaboration, collaborating and partnerships instead of ownership. And then a scarcity or a lack of resources becomes a pooling of resources, which creates that sense of abundance and creates value, knowing there's enough to go around. So how can you recognize learning agility? Leaders who have it usually demonstrate these 5 traits. An ability to perform in ambiguity. So when complexity clouds the path forward, they're able to move. Managing uncertainty and making decisions without all the information. Finding the controllables in a situation and being able to act within them. A learning agile leader is resilient, able to bounce back quickly from setbacks and take on new challenges. And they seek out those challenges and really thrive. They get bored quickly, right? Always looking for a new challenge. And because of this, they have developed a high tolerance for risk. They see failure as a learning opportunity, and they're able to fail forward. So I can look on this circle and identify 5 separate leadership skills. And I'm not suggesting that these skills need to be developed in a vacuum in order to acquire learning agility. It's more of an interdependence on each other that allows you to focus on one skill, right? And have that transference with another. So for example, a high risk tolerance could be coupled with resilience. So think of the last time that you had to improvise based on you know, what's happening today. And likely that was probably this morning. So at a macro level right now, for example, we have companies that are improvising to survive and stay afloat with the constraints placed on them. We've got car companies making ventilators and restaurants selling t-shirts. These are current examples of the quick innovation brought forth with learning agility leadership and approaching new problems with experiments. All right, so let's break learning agile behaviors into these 5 categories. And here's where you can assess yourself and your learning agility. Think of it in terms of a scale of 1 to 5 for each of these, and just mentally rate yourself as we go along. So mental agility, how comfortable are you in dealing with complexity? Are you able to take all the factors into account when looking for options? Do you seek to find more factors when you don't have enough? And how about with people agility? Are you a skilled communicator who can work with diverse people and create a diversity of thought, actually welcome it, and formulate it if it doesn't already exist? Change agility, do you like to experiment? Are you not afraid to be at the forefront of change? And results agility, can you deliver results in first-time situations? Self-awareness, we've already talked about this a little bit, but are you able to recognize your own strengths and weaknesses? And how do you know that you're able to recognize them?
And I think this is maybe a really fun place to get a poll from our audience and see where they land.
Oh, good idea.
Can maybe get that out. I know Michael would be the expert to shoot that out here. Here it is already. Thank you, Michael. If everyone would like to participate here and just give a little idea of maybe where we are with respect to which of these is most challenging to you, leave that up for a few more moments. Can't wait to see what that looks like.
Right.
And I really love that you broke this down in these 5 categories. I think they're very specific in a way where, yeah, it's about quickly changing course, but with different focus, right? So it's
right.
Awesome.
Thanks.
And while we're waiting for the results, we're having definitely a very global audience again today, all the way from Switzerland. And we have a lot of California, we have Norway, we have East Coast. So it's always wonderful to see all of you guys joining. And here we are. Oh, wow, we have 3 times, 33%. That's awesome. We have mental agility, change agility, and results agility in even parts. Does that surprise you at all a little bit, Heidi?
You know, it doesn't. And
in line with what you usually hear.
Right. That aligns. And what strikes me about those results is that is where people aren't having difficulty, and that's with the people and necessarily themselves on the self-awareness piece. Yeah. So that's great, because I think that can be a jumping off point, right? Like using our people agility as a platform to build these other skills, maybe a little more one at a time, but being intentional about it. Are you surprised?
No, not at all. I actually really was just curious, and what I'm surprised about is that it evenly landed almost, you know, with the, I mean, not almost, with the same percentage on all 3 areas. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that's great. Good, thank you. That's great to know. So I've got a little story for you. I had a client who most recently, I think many clients are going through learning agility right now with coaching. However, this one stood out to me in particular. My client's name is Victoria. She's a new manager who leads a team of employees who are early in their careers. And we'd already been working together to increase motivation within her team together. Add that to managing a team that's new to remote work, right, within the last 5 weeks, and the team seemed to have lost focus to her. And that's obviously very common right now. Due to the nature of where Victoria is, deadlines hadn't changed. I know that for some businesses there was some flow with that, but with hers it hadn't. So the team was starting to miss due dates. I mean, that lack of focus was translating into affecting the results. So through coaching, Victoria realized she had to adapt her people agility. So isn't that interesting that she felt the same way about her ability to be agile around people? So she used that as her jumping off point, adjusting her style of managing, and that to give her employees more of what they need right now, really kind of bumping up that empathy piece, right? And what they really needed right now. And part of this was just going on her feeling, but also from her asking, was that they needed someone to really know what they were going through. So what she ended up doing as part of her results and her experiment was adding those more frequent check-ins, adding more team meetings, excuse me, and more personal calls, just one-on-ones, even just kind of off the cuff. And then she kept changing up team activities every week, which just helped to keep them on their toes. So last Friday, for example, she had the team meet for lunch over Zoom. No formal agenda, just kind of a sit there and a shoot the breeze kind of lunch with people, just to take the edge off, but still create that sense of connection that seems to be easier to do in an office. Another thing that she did was added a whiteboard right behind her so that every time the team saw her on video, they could see the KPI status. Just kind of keep it top of mind for them. And she added a recognition piece to that board, so that also people who were doing well or deserve some accolades were added so that everyone could see as well. So it's a motivating factor. And I think it's a good example of how she translated her people agility into change agility by experimenting. And ultimately, by doing this, it affected her results agility too.
I just put a little question out for everyone that's listening here today. Knowing what you know now, how would you have responded differently, right, to some of these abrupt changes that came to us? And when we're thinking about agility and how our brain functions sometimes, where it's not really supporting the agile responses, right, and it's actually getting a little bit in our way. But knowing what we know now with this wonderful, what we call hindsight, right, or looking in the rear mirror, just curious what pops up for some of you guys. If you like, please share with us in the chat box, and curious to see what may pop up for you. As we're moving along, I'll share the responses with you, Heidi.
All right, great. I would love to know that. I know that obviously there were some logistical challenges at the beginning of this for a lot of people, but you're right, Petra, the benefit of hindsight. Where could you really have benefited from what you know now in order to face the new leadership challenges?
Yeah, what kind of quick adjustments, would have really been helpful? So we're at this point already starting to reflect a little bit on the experience, right? This is again the benefit of knowing what we didn't know then. But what could really make a difference, right? And how could we quickly maybe make a course correction to optimize as we launch further into this scenario now?
Fair question.
And we got some responses here regarding how to react, being more gentle and forgiving with myself and others.
Beautiful response and spot on. And I think that's been a difficult one for some people. The self-critical nature, it really kind of comes out when stressed. So I think that is a great response. Okay.
And if you'd like to move on, Heidi, like I said, I'll alert you if we get some more feedback on this one. I'm sure there's going to be another couple of answers trickling in.
Okay, great. So we had talked about aging business values as barriers to learning agilities, but there's also these singular cues. And these are so interesting to me because I've actually witnessed some of these behaviors in colleagues, and I've seen them in myself. I just mentioned how our stress response is kind of geared to help us do things that come naturally to us. And sometimes our natural behaviors are not the most productive ones. So here's one where, is there a need to be the expert, maybe on your team or within the organization? It's a hard one to let go of, isn't it? If you're used to being the go-to for information, or you have a need to be needed. Sometimes some of us serve that role on our teams. How about a bias to your own expertise? This one's tricky, right? You can't always see that this is the case. And that's where pumping up your agility can really help. Do you have a comfort or a familiarity with predictive outcomes, either unconsciously or consciously? If it's unconscious, that can really be a barrier. Thinking this is the way we've always done it, right? And maybe taking a bit of what seems to be the easy road. Or is there an attachment to particular results, knowing you want a specific outcome and then creating the situations to make that happen? The problem with that is that it then blocks out your ability to see other options, let alone manage to them. And a lack of thought diversity. We've heard the term thought diversity come up quite a lot in the past decade, and really, is there a propensity on your team to not run things by others outside of the team, or to ask the usual people for their feedback? It's important to invite those different perspectives so you can increase the width of feedback that you're getting. And then a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. Fixed mindsets can prevent important skill development. They can prevent growth. And then a growth mindset, as we know, can help to frame failure in a more productive light. So I'm curious if you see yourself here. Is there a barrier that you might recognize in yourself or another?
And I just put that out there again in the chat box for all of you. If you guys have something that pops up with respect to one particular barrier maybe that you came across in the course of this transition, I would be curious to hear from you. Please do put that into the chat box for us. While we're waiting to see what's coming in there, I really want to applaud you on putting some of the stuff out there that we're all probably struggling with every once in a while, right? Which is, I'm sure, as you have it here, the bias to your own expertise, or the need to feel like you have some solutions and answers right away, right? And those kinds of moments often show that it's the collective approach that really yields the best results, right? Rather than this pressure that we put on ourselves and feel like we're expected to already have the perfect answer, right? While we're still really experimenting.
So true. So true. Yeah. So as we're waiting for that, I want to share an exercise that I've done with some clients that yield some interesting results, especially around learning agility at a micro view. This is a favorite activity of mine just because it's so simple, but it can really lead to those, what we call those aha moments, right? Those prime moments in thought that help you create those new neural pathways, which are the precursor to developing these new behaviors. So this exercise helps to create those mindset shifts that, after the people agility that can help in change and results and generating options. And those are all necessary to increase the skill. Mm-hmm. So here's how it looks. You name the challenge that you or maybe your employee is facing. So say an employer or colleague comes to you with an issue and they've reached a stopping point or they've gotten stuck. Or maybe it's you. You've got a new challenge, the complexity of the environment in these days. What are you facing that you'd like to put through the test? And so you start and you frame that in one sentence. Sometimes that's not always easy either, is it? So you frame it in just one sentence, and then you ask a series of questions. And the key to this is not moving on until each question is answered thoroughly. And that usually means about at least 3 responses to the same question. So you state the challenge and then you say, yes, and what is in your control here, or what is in my control? Yes, and what are my options? Yes, and what have I tried? And you keep going. And what this does is helps to open the brain up for possibilities. And it goes beyond open-ended questions. I mean, we all know that yes or no questions can really shut down this kind of opportunity, but by forcing yourself or the person you're speaking with to continue down a path and being silent until they generate these solutions, it really can be very, very powerful. So I used this recently with a client. Common coaching topic in the last month was manager who had newly remote teams again. You know, the shift had been made by this point to remote work. Some of the kinks had been worked out, and the novelty of having a formerly in-office team shift to remote work, that had kind of worn off, right? And now some real struggles were emerging. And this manager was dealing with this newly dispersed team, and he could tell that this team lacked motivation. So we applied this method. And so he stated his challenge in one sentence is, right now, my team is lacking motivation while working remotely. And, you know, motivation is one of those things that's difficult in the best of times for managers to impart on their teams. You look for ways to kind of tap into that intrinsic motivation for people. So he felt even doubly challenged here, to having to do it while not having his team be newly remote. So we ran it through the questions. I asked him, what is in your control here? And so we kept going through that. He said things like, I do control team meetings, I do control assignments, I control my own attitude. And at the end, he decided to try some new things, some solutions that he had generated during this exercise. And what he did was go to each member of the team and ask them what they personally needed. And that wasn't a conversation he had normally had before. And trying new things was also kind of risky for him because he works in a very traditional finance office, the very formal culture. Excuse me. But to have some fun on team calls is where he also landed. To change up who hosts his weekly meetings, to mandate that everybody be on video with each other versus just conference calls. And as you know, it's a completely different dynamic when that happens. So for him, going through this exercise, opening up options that weren't there before, he grew his learning agility. And being willing to experiment is a risk. The key is to adopt that mindset, that learning, learning agile mindset, and then adopt those behaviors that allow you as a leader to continue the cycle, develop, grow, and learn new ways of solving problems. So hold on here while I take a sip of water, Petra.
Oh, please, absolutely.
Excuse me.
Petra, we have a question here that says, this was a comment really, knowing what I know now, I feel like knowing my people better, what motivates, how to keep them engaged, et cetera, would have minimized disruption and stress. If you'd like to comment on that.
That is a fantastic call out. It's kind of a lesson learned, right?
Yep.
That would have helped because it would have probably allowed you to make these shifts to accommodate them sooner because you would have known. So now it sounds like you're faced with, not only do I have to accommodate, but I have to learn, and that takes time.
I think sometimes too, when we talk about agile responses, right, and trying things, and just like you described the example with one of your clients, it's this, you know, fear too of things that you try for the first time. How are they going to roll out, right? How am I going to show up? How is this going to sound like? What is this going to look like? And I think there's hesitation of, right, with the trying in itself. And I think what's maybe helpful here too for many of us is this vulnerability piece, right? It's okay. It's okay if it sounds a bit weird, right? If it's okay if it looks a little strange, because we haven't tried this before, right? And we're gonna get better at it as we practice this more. But I think there is this idea sometimes, you know, when you try, rather than this going wrong, right? I'm just better not do it. So we talk ourselves out of a lot of things, right? When it comes to experimenting and trying and just really looking at the options and not dismiss things too quickly, just because it gets us into a uncharted territory, kind of discomfort zone, right?
I think that is spot on. And this is one of those skills or set of behaviors. I think that once you adopt the mindset, it has a ripple effect around you. But to your point, there is risk in going first, right? So if you shift away from old ways of being, then you have to be able to be vulnerable and to up that risk of having people not quite understanding what you're doing. So I think that's a great segue into what I was going to talk about next, is how do you become an agility enabler? So what you can do today to increase your learning agility. You're dealing with this increasing complexity, and learning agility is the mindset that helps us to manage and lead in these times. So the first thing that I would suggest is to talk about it. So introduce this as a concept to your organization, and that can start with a colleague, a peer, your team, however you would like to do it, but really introducing it and then talking about how this might benefit everybody. And then ask them about their thoughts. Tell your colleagues that you're experimenting with the growth of your team around this mind shift. Get their feedback on that. Agree on a new set of behaviors within the team, which adds that accountability to each other. And also it helps to make a culture shift, because that's really what we're talking about here, is being able to act in these new ways. And if you start, you automatically affect the people that are around you because of your actions, partially because you're engaging them in different ways, just by asking questions and looking for these solutions. So continue to reframe, and that top circle there talks about seeking. So seeking new challenges, an intentional willingness to immerse in challenging situations. These challenging situations we're in now, a lot of them happened to us, right? However, what can come of them? It's risky, it's uncomfortable getting into these new situations, and seeing what we're going through now as a prime opportunity for growth. So the person who shared about, I wish I had gotten to know my team a little better about what makes them tick and how I could have, that might have enabled me to support them. So it's a great hindsight, great learning opportunity now, and likely will be a better manager going forward because of it. So that reframe really helps in helping us to deal with this time too, and also increases our tolerance for risk. Asking questions. And we did some of this in our exercise, and you can see how asking questions helps to generate those solutions. Question situations, not only asking the why and the how, but asking why not? Why can't we do things this certain way? Or upon generating those solutions, asking what else is possible, and then continually asking what else. That is essential for insight. Reflecting, Peter talked a little bit about this, that hindsight comes into this bucket. But because it's such a key factor in how the brain learns, seeking that feedback and being able to reflect upon it, that's one of the tools that is best for self-awareness and being able to evolve. And you answered that self-awareness wasn't necessarily an area that you felt like you weren't agile in, and that is great news. So you're already able to take those experiences, reflect on them, and then the whole idea with learning agility is to be able to then apply them to these novel solutions. And then last, a lesson is not truly learned until it is applied. So using the lessons and the failures and applying it to new situations will help you to increase the skill as well.
I think another thing that pops up for me here too is, you know, when we look at this full circle and how do we adjust our approach, particularly when it comes to teams, right? And how do we really dig in here in a supportive manner? I think for a lot of us that are very task focused usually, right? There really is a challenge when we come from task focused to really a shift to more people focused, right? So right now we have to really be more mindful of the whole person, not just the expertise that they bring to the task, but also how do we keep that person whole, right, in that situation. And I think there is, like you said earlier before too, many opportunities for touch points that really go a little bit more into probing what's the well-being state right now with my team members. Where are they at, and how can I be mindful of, you know, shifting more focus on that while we're staying task focused.
That is a great point, Petra. Excuse me, being holistic in this time is something we're not necessarily used to. And it's not that we didn't care about our teams. It's that now that becomes such a higher need during the time within this complexity that you have to keep your eye on it. So I think that is a great point.
Yeah, and the curiosity, right? The asking. I can never emphasize that enough with everyone and for everyone. It's just like, just ask. Right? We shortcut a lot, we assume a lot, we interpret a lot, but we don't really confirm lots of that, right? And I think this is, again, a very interesting, in that sense, scenario we're going through, because we really need to learn more, right? How is everyone doing? How is everyone coping? How are we faring individually, collectively, right? And we can only do that by asking questions. So I love the asking part here. I think that's one that really resonates with me.
Well, and it keeps us from falling back into that trap of thinking we have all the answers. Right. You mentioned assuming, and yes, on a team, I think that's an easy thing to do. You work with these people day in and day out. You know their quality of work and the way that they approach things usually. So it doesn't always occur to us to just take a pause and ask how you can best support them during this time and what their biggest challenges are.
And actually that leads me back to one of our previous questions about barriers. We had one here in the audience, lack of communication from my supervisors. I think communication is a big piece in this, right?
Yes, you know, that is such a great call out. And I've heard that a lot lately, coupled with my manager's not giving me what I need. Right. So I mean, that's the communication piece is a component of that. And I think that is really important. So where could we use learning agility for that? Would it be asking for what you need? And, you know, I don't want to put it back on the person as much. It's just a matter of, gosh, this is such new ground for all of us. And perhaps there's an assumption on the manager's part that you've got it all taken care of. So I think that is a great call out. So now we're looking towards the future, right? And we don't know what it holds. But somebody pointed out that I was reading something this week that said, you know, we never really did know what it held. We just kind of thought we did, right? This one came out of left field for most of us, but you have more power in your leadership than you might think, and the ability to thrive in the complexity of what's coming next. So learning agility is that mindset that will allow you to not only lead during this time, but there's uncertainty and so many uncontrollables. If you're not agile, you have that risk of seeing that challenge that's right in front of you, and you risk solving for the wrong issue. To build agility in yourself, I think the best place to start is to create the space. And when I say that, I mean create the mental space, setting intentionalities around this, and then creating the space on your calendar. That part is so important, even if it's just 10 minutes in a day or even during the week. Get intentional about building your skills, using that time to reflect, and looking for opportunities in all that you've experienced. And then next, assessing your current skill set. Where did you recognize those barriers in yourself to learning agility that we talked about? What can you leverage as far as answering those questions about the types of agility behaviors that come naturally to you or that you feel confident about? And where's your biggest opportunity for growth? Look for learning agility in others. Hopefully after today, you'll be able to recognize it more readily. Open the conversations and ask the questions. And cultivating thought diversity in all that you do, and making no decision, making this promise to yourself right now that you'll make no decision without eliciting new and different varied feedback from different places. A big one is becoming comfortable with discomfort. I think so many times we look to try a new thing and then look to master it before we move on. Well, there's really a lot to be said for staying in that discomfort and then moving to the next thing, getting uncomfortable there too. It's building those new skills and stretching your leadership chops. It'll absolutely take you out of your comfort zone. Increase your risk tolerance. There's no growth without challenge, though. And reflect. We've touched on that one a lot, and that's something you can do today, right? Just where do I have that opportunity? What has gone well in the past and why? That's where the learning really takes place. And above all, be resilient. Leadership agility can open doors, so look for them.
And it's amazing as we go through this and as we progress in our series that we started several weeks ago, how much interface we have with a lot of these things, right? How they all really come together and how they build off of each other. When it comes to, again, resilience, right? We've talked about that in length, the empowerment, the awareness, you know, building awareness around certain things, creating space, you know, for experimentation and the whole idea of being creative, which is almost a precursor to agility, right? I mean, you got to really engage your higher brain to come up with some innovative, you know, solutions. And it's a challenge because our brain, parts of it shut down in a situation like what we're in right now. So we have to really reflect on what puts me in that state where I can really get back into the creative thinking mode, right? Rather than the self-protective and self-preservation mode that we're all in a little bit to some extent, right? Some of us notice it. Some of us may not notice it as much, right? Everybody copes differently. And that's some of that stuff that you addressed earlier with the barriers, right? Some of those barriers are actually things that we're not even really aware of, right? So again, the reflection on what's really happening, what's supporting me, what's not really supporting me, and what can I control here, and come up with some different ways of doing things, right? It's always all connected, and I love how really these different areas build off of each other. So this was a key component again to the whole, right? As we're all designing our path forward. Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah, you know, and I want to add one thing that I think I'm missing on here is self-compassion. Somebody had called that out earlier, and developing that as you're, or utilizing that, leveraging it as you're moving forward, learning new skills, I think is something that helps to build that resiliency too, to move forward.
For sure.
Yeah. Great. I have a resources slide here for you, and the top three are books. The first one actually is a shorter of the books, and then also some online resources that can help your efforts here as well.
I thank you for that. We usually make that available. I know we have a couple of people in the audience that are going to be happy to have that as a later study guide. Let me check back on some of these key items. So we're happy to make that available to everybody that joined us today. I'm curious to see if we have any other follow-up questions. I know you going to be with us here to answer some of those live. So if any of you have some things pop up for yourselves as you reflect on what Heidi just shared. Again, please feel free to use the chat box for that, and we'll be very happy to address that. I was wondering, one thing that you also touched on here in that previous slide was that we sometimes solve for the wrong problem. I thought that was a very interesting observation, and probably something that some of us can find ourselves in, right? When we're in that state, sometimes we're thinking we know where to go. And it's that whole idea of we need to have a solution and answer, and we're actually really not regrouping enough to shift that focus on what really needs to be done, right, in that moment. What's the priority? We had, again, as this all builds up to one beautiful large umbrella here that we covered the whole thriving from home topic with, we had the mastering focus. And again, it's all these pieces, right? They create a lot of interface here as we come to learning agility and how they all play off of each other.
It's true. It's true. And I think they're very interdependent. And that's what I always talk to my clients about, is how you can't help but have a ripple effect when you lift a singular. When it comes to your leadership skills, you're lifting the whole, right? The benchmark changes because of it. So the solving for the right problem becomes critical. And I think that's one of those, especially right now, because, and you had mentioned the way the brain works, we have a stress response, and a stress response really looks to focus resources on one thing, and that's to stop the stress, right? So that can really be one of those pitfalls or traps that keeps you stuck and not being able to be agile. So that's why developing some of these muscles can really help to arrest that stress response, let you come out of the safety of the cave, as it were, and deal with what you need to in newer and more productive ways. So that's a great point.
Any other questions we have here for you guys, or things we can address directly? I was wondering, did we shoot out? I think I made, actually, that was one of my little mistakes in the beginning. I think I had the question not properly positioned in the chat. We had initially a question around the hindsight a little bit, how could we, responded differently with the rear view mirror view now, to these quickly changing scenarios and this quick and abrupt transition to working from home. If any one of you would like to share an experience with that regard, any thought that came up in terms of what could have maybe been critical in that transition, please do share with us. I'm wondering if we want to bring up another example, maybe that would be resonating in that context. Heidi, I'm sure you, as you explore this with your clients, right? There's perhaps another key insight that you found in your conversations lately. I know we all have very similar sessions with our clients at the moment around similar things, right?
Right. Well, one that really, this happened a little earlier on, Petra, but I had a gentleman who was in South America and had as part of a global company. So he was leading a team there. And it was probably the first couple of weeks that this had happened and or started. And he said, I do not know how to lead through this. And I was very surprised to hear him say that. How he was looking at it was more about it being singular skills, right? He certainly had his strengths as a leader, but he also, none of us had ever experienced anything like this before, right? So what he ended up doing, and what we did through our work together, is instead of feeling that stress response was just like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do, and completely shut down, we went back and use the benefit of hindsight to when was the last time that you had to do something that you weren't expecting to do. And what we were able to do then is really leverage the skill set that he did have. And one of the things that he had was people agility, like most of you. And he also had results agility, which he didn't even really realize it in that context. And so by pulling out those things that he did well, there's that interdependence again, right? And we were able to say, okay, how can you leverage those and pull some of those pieces out to lead through this time? So what he ended up doing is leveraging his ability to create a vision. That was something that he was very good at. He could create a vision, and he was very strategic about the future. And albeit didn't know much about the future, he was able to craft these different options. If we do this, we're going to do this. And then we're going to also be able to course correct, and we're going to be able to pivot based on what happened. So each week when I talk to him, we talk about these changes that he's able to make on the fly, because it was a mindset shift around his abilities and leveraging what he could do well to generate those options and lead through this time. So I hope that was what you were looking for. That's what came up for me when you were talking.
Thank you. Another thing that I really love about the conclusion here that you have at the end with respect to cultivate thought diversity, I think that's actually also something that sometimes gets overlooked in terms of value add, right? So the idea of getting different perspective and really putting the light on something from different angles can make a huge difference. And I really believe that we have brought in inclusion and diversity so much into the conversation in recent years, and this is one of those moments where this really shines, right? If it's implemented correctly, there's an innumerable value in really harvesting these different perspectives and opinions in approach to a solution.
Teacher, I have a question here for you.
Yeah.
It says, it could be helpful to get some thoughts on how we can be more aware regarding the limitations of self-awareness for resilience. It was hard to click this as a choice. It is quite hard to know how good we are at being aware of the status of our self-awareness.
That is a great question. How to be more aware of your awareness is really what it comes down to. And we had talked about that being one of the traps. What I like to do with my clients when we talk about raising self-awareness is really start with looking at, self-assessment is important, and talk about leadership assessments. I think they're a very, very useful tool. That would probably be the first place, especially emotional intelligence is one that measures your level of self-awareness and then gives you actionable steps. But outside of that, I would also elicit feedback and or recommend that feedback is elicited. I mean, obviously, you're likely going to get some from performance, formal performance reviews, but really this becomes one where you can ask additional questions to your colleagues, to your peers, to the people on your team, and what could I be doing better? And what am I doing well? I think those types of levels of feedback are very helpful in that they're validating what you might already think to be true. And they may point out some areas of growth. This is one of those things too that you can develop some risk tolerance around, because it's a risky thing to do, right? And so I would suggest those two things. What would you say, Petra?
Well, the transparency and the open invitation to feedback is always a gift, right? I say in any situation, it's just always important to introduce that and really, as we talked about culture a little bit earlier, to make that safe for everyone to really contribute, because it's critical, right? Some of that stuff is critical to know and hear to really make the right adjustment. And oftentimes people hold back because they don't know if it's appreciated, right? What they have to add to the conversation.
Right.
So it's important to introduce that and really encourage people to feel empowered to add that piece of opinion, right? If it's a critical piece in the solution designing process. I think what I saw here too in the audience, I'll share that real quick with you too. We have been connecting with employees on a weekly basis to communicate big picture stuff and hosting more casual virtual meetings, you know, playing online games, match games every other week to gauge engagement and assess how the team is doing. This worked very well for us, and then when surveyed, our employees said they like this. So it's again from a task orientation more to, you know, how do we fare together as a team, right? People oriented. So that was one suggestion that I just wanted to share from the audience. Apparently something that has worked really well for them.
Yeah, that is great. I love that. And the fact that they love it too, it tells you you're on the right track.
Yeah. And again, curiosity, right? How is everybody doing? What can we do to come together more on that human level, right? I think that's probably something that most people miss, particularly ones that haven't traditionally worked a lot from home, right? Out of a sudden, you're really in your little island or on your little island. So all these things help. I want to lead with that a little bit into what's coming on next week. I think we again set a beautiful precursor for continuing the thought process into what matters to teams most at the moment. Agile leadership is definitely one approach. Ability to provoke agility and inspire agility in others, and get that really synergy get going again with your own team. So next week we'll meet here again with an expert on team mindset. And again, I think we did a beautiful precursor here for that. I'm looking forward to all of you joining us again, and please be aware, we will ask you to register for next week as you log out of today's webinar. I want to thank you, Heidi, again. It was such a pleasure to hear your insights, particularly as you coach some of your leaders through this really critical, unprecedented time that we're all in. And much enjoyed all of your points that you brought up very specifically to how do we lead better self, and then of course, how do we better lead others. I was wondering, Michael, if you have any final comments in the Q&A that we can address before we wrap up here as we go to the top of the hour.
Yeah, I think we're good on the chat window. I'm just going to make one more plug, as you did for after we leave this webinar. You do have the opportunity to register, as well as to go ahead and take that assessment that we have available to us. So you'll see as soon as the webinar closes that one of your opportunities is to log on to our website and take the Career Pulse assessment. As much as we talked about self-awareness today, this is a great tool that's available to you to really understand where you are during these times. Thank you, Petra.
Thank you, Michael, for mentioning. Yeah, fresh out of LeggUP Labs, we have an assessment. And I think to your point earlier too, Heidi, with assessing a little bit where everyone's at, right? So we actually have that available for both productivity and wellness, which are some of the dimensions that we got into here today. So yes, definitely look into that, see it, feel it out, try it out. There's a link that gets you right to it. And I believe in less than 10 minutes, you should have a results report for yourself to inspire some more thinking on how to close maybe some of those leadership skill gaps that pop up in those extreme scenarios that we're in, right? On that note, I want to again thank all of you for joining us today. Please join us again next week. We will be here again for you and for the coming weeks every Thursday to support you with insight on how to best navigate and champion the situation that we have for self and our remote teams. And wish all of you a very pleasant afternoon. And again, thank you for joining LeggUP on Thriving from Home.